A lot of games can be a one and done. I mean, they might have replay value for a mechanical reason, but you get the point. I mean, I'll go back to a lot of that type of game, but there's some games that's just not enough. In order to really get it, you got to go through it more than once. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 video games you have to play twice to experience fully. Starting off with number 10, it's Silent Hill 2. The thing with horror games, they're usually pretty short. There's not a lot of replay value built into the premise. They tend to be super linear, not mechanically complex. So a common method used by developers of these games to add a little replay value is to include incentives to play the game more than once. Expect a lot of horror games on this list. It's just an unavoidable fact that a lot of these things have great New Game Plus modes and tend to include new content in them. I'm not just talking about new weapons and costumes, though that is a thing. I mean entirely original sections of the story and new endings. With Silent Hill 2, there's 3 possible endings if you play through the game normally, but if you go back and play it again, that number more than doubles to 8. Yes, in the new remake, there are 5 new endings you can see through playing New Game Plus, and if you know how to trigger them, you can see all of them in just one additional playthrough. That's probably not going to happen if you're playing like a normal person, because these new endings require finding obscure items in the environment, but if you're a filthy cheater, you just look up what to do online. It's fairly simple, especially because the game gives you a chainsaw right at the start of the second playthrough, which makes mincemeat out of everything that looks at you funny. Or, I guess, points its upper legs at you. I don't know. I often wonder how a lot of those things look at you. Still, 3 of these extra endings are from the original and 2 are new. They're all worth seeing at least once. And number 9 is Armored Core 6. From the developer of Armored Core 6, along with many other games like the famous Soul series. I don't need to tell you who From is, but they always offer a lot of New Game Plus stuff. Pretty much all their games let you start over from the beginning with your experience and equipment intact and face off against an even tougher version of the game. None of that's new, but where the Souls games are basically the same game in New Game Plus, a little tougher in Dark Souls 2 case, add some new enemies around sometimes, Armored Core 6 changes the game in a few major ways. There's new weapons and parts shop, for instance. There's new arena opponents and entirely new routes for missions. In New Game Plus, while playing regular missions, you sometimes make a decision about who to size with. So if you want to completely change your allegiance from how you went through the game originally, you can do that. You can potentially unlock new alt missions that allow you to play through certain events from a completely different perspective.
So you got a nice punch in. Go buy a lottery ticket. The red guns are going to be first over the wall. Have fun watching from the sidelines.
And some of these changes have a huge effect on the missions you have available to you. Even if you didn't care about all that, there's already an incentive to play through the game again because there's 2 separate ending routes, and you can only pick one the first playthrough. So if you want to see that other version, the other final levels, the other way to the end of the game, you have to play through a second time. There's even a third ending that can be unlocked if you make some certain decisions through the third playthrough. So to fully experience the game, you have to play through it at least 3 times. In this game's case, that's not that hard to do. It's fun and it's fairly short, so don't need much convincing to jump in for a second round. All the New Game Plus extras are just icing on the cake for me.
Your cooperation is appreciated, Raven. 621, we've received a friendly ID tag from the Liberation Front. Let's not waste their firepower.
At number 8 is the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. The Stanley Parable is a game about endings. You kind of have to play it more than once to get anything out of it. If you only played through the game once, then you turn the game on, make 3 or 4 simple choices, get an ending after about 10 minutes, and shut the game off forever. That wouldn't really be in the spirit of the thing. It's basically a walking simulator with branching paths that lead to different endings. Still manages to have some kind of New Game Plus, though. If you see a few base game endings, then eventually a new door appears and a new content sign is next to it.
Oh, good. You notice my sign. Yes, I have something very exciting to show you.
It leads to this huge new area that massively expands the scope of the game, the Stanley Parable 2 exhibition. Yeah, the game has its own sequel baked into the game, and once you complete it, you're basically dropped into this game's bizarre version of New Game Plus, where you can replay all the old endings, but now you have a bucket. That sounds like a joke, like they're making fun of the idea of New Game Plus because they give you a useless bucket.
It's true. As long as you hold on to the bucket, the many disorienting contradictions of the Stanley parable will feel perfectly normal and perhaps even comforting.
But for some reason, holding this thing actually does a lot to change the game and the endings and all that. It's not just new dialogue either, it's straight up completely different. It's so absurd and completely dumb. I mean, you're wandering around holding a bucket, but if you don't play all through the old endings again with the new bucket, you're missing out on a lot of content. And as everybody knows, content is good no matter how pointless it is. I think that's kind of the point that it's making, but like at the same time, it ends up making good content for that reason. I don't know. It's weird. In this case, the bucket endings are worth seeing, even if the whole thing feels like they're just trolling us after a while. They are. And it's actually good.
I need to do what the narrator says. I need to see the true ending. This made no sense at all to the bucket, which was simply trying to live its life down here as comfortably as possible. Yet Stanley was unconsolable.
At number 7 is The Quiet Man. Now, I didn't say the games that I'm going to talk about have to be good. I said you have to play through them more than once to get everything out of them. The Quiet Man is a terrible action game with a baffling story that only raises more questions than it answers. Like, why does a game where the premise is the main character is deaf, so there's no sound, have multiple extended scenes where the main character isn't there? Like, so many scenes seem like they were made with sound in mind, and then they were just muted later, which is obviously what happened because the game's one kind of interesting idea. The Quiet Man answered. After beating the game and going through this absolutely nonsensical story in silence, the game gives you the option to go back and play it through again, only this time with the sound, so you can hear what everyone's actually saying. In a better game, that would be an interesting idea, but, I mean, most of the fun of The Quiet Man comes from being completely baffled by everything going on. And to the game's credit, there are some scenes where hearing what is actually being said does change the context of the scene. Like a part where it seems like a police officer is comforting a little baby Quiet Man, but in reality he's just being all crazy, threatening. Like, it's insane. The plot doesn't make any more sense when you can hear it. That's kind of the most wild aspect of it. Learning what is actually supposed to be happening takes a little bit away from the humor. It's not as funny to laugh at without all the awkward silence, but I mean, it doesn't make the plot any less bonkers. And number 6 is Blasphemous. This one's going to be a little tricky to explain, but yeah, follow me. So the first Blasphemous game does have a third golden ending, but you don't get it by playing New Game Plus. But New Game Plus still has some major new additions to the game that really expand not just the story, but the gameplay as well. It was all added to the game with the Stir of Dawn DLC. Originally, there wasn't even a second playthrough. The game just stopped at the ending. Now you go back into the game with all the upgrades unlocked, but everything hits like a truck, and you have to contend with this new pestilence system. I don't know, when I played it, I didn't really think about it as a system, but as like a new annoyance, I guess, because it does make the game quite a bit harder. You have to pick between 3 different options that make you weaker in some way. One makes your attacks half as effective, one replaces your health bar with life orbs so you die faster, and the other makes the penalty for death significantly more punishing. These new challenge modes significantly alter how the game is played, but the real meat of the New Game Plus is the new bosses. There are 5 super tough fights that can only be attempted after beating the game, and finding this new NPC that only appears if you use a special item that, again, you only get on playthrough 2. These new fights are the real stars of the show. They are super brutal, but if you want to experience everything Blasphemous has to offer, they're well worth hunting down.
I am called Hebrael, held captive by the ancient miracle's plans since my arms grew, since the first creak of my crooked neck.
And number 5 is Resistance 1. Here's one I hear almost no one talk about, but it's one of those weird things that's always stuck out in my brain. The original Resistance game was on the PlayStation 3. There's 9 guns you can find in the campaign normally. One of them is just an upgraded version of the standard alien machine gun. It's a pretty good selection of weapons, but here's the thing. If you play through the game a second time, there's 4 more guns. That's 1/3 more guns in the first playthrough, and all these new weapons are awesome. Honestly, they just make the game a lot more fun to play. Nothing else about the game changes. It's all exactly the same except these new weapons, but they're enough of a game changer that it's really worth playing through the game a second time just to play with them. They're not just fun novelty either. They straight up make the game better. So the second playthrough is a lot more satisfying because these things they're there. They're powerful. Having them means you have more ammo for your regular weapons. It's just a better game, which obviously makes the decision to lock them behind a second playthrough kind of bizarre. But man, does it really add some replay value to the game. If you actually know they're there, most people probably had absolutely no idea that there were new guns in New Game Plus. I mean, what other FPS game has ever done that? I cannot think of another one. Like the guns they add in a second playthrough are novelty guns, not like make the game better guns. But they're here, they're real, and you haven't fully experienced the game until you've used them. At number 4 is the Dead Space remake, another horror game, another New Game Plus mode. The original version of Dead Space also lets you play through the game a second time, but the recent remake really expands the mode with things that keep the second playthrough a lot more fresh. You get a tougher suit, bunch of free money, powerful nodes for upgrading your equipment, which sound like they would make the game easier, if not for these new, tougher versions of necromorphs with weird purple skin and glowing eyes. These new enemies are super fast and much tougher than the standard fare, and they can pop up at any time, so they really keep you on your toes.
There's no survivors. Damon's been trying to get into the command computer.
The most exciting addition is the new secret ending, which is, as you'd expect, exclusive to New Game Plus. To get it, you have to find 12 marker fragments hidden around the Ishimura and use them at the ritual site near the end of the game, and that triggers the new ending. Along with all that, there's new notes that expand the story in a lot of intriguing ways, with new Easter eggs as well. As far as New Game Plus modes go, it's easily one of the best. It's not a completely new game or anything, but it adds so much to playing Dead Space, you have to play it a second time. With lots of games, it actually can feel a bit like a chore, but not here. At number 3 is Alan Wake 2. Added to the game after the initial release, Final Draft Mode is essentially the game's New Game Plus, but it has some significant changes to the plot. There are games like Batman Arkham Knight where New Game Plus adds a few new enemies and surprises to the narrative, but nothing major. But Alan Wake 2's second go-around is essentially the actual true ending of the game. Along with the usual New Game Plus you'd expect, like all your weapons and upgrades carrying over, there's also a lot of new story elements that expand the stuff and adds to the reveals of the original game. There's new manuscript pages to find as Saga, new video clips to view as Alan. There's a familiar face from Control, which, if you know me and the Control enthusiast I am, really makes Final Draft necessary. But the newer in-depth ending actually wraps up the plot in a more satisfying way. The main game ended so ambiguously, having something more concrete is intriguing, but there's actually more. There's also a lot of small, subtle changes to the dialogue. Certain scenes are expanded, and Alan Wake plays a more prominent role in the narrative. It throws a lot of new stuff at you, even if the actual game part is relatively unchanged. But let's be real here, it's a Remedy game. We're all here for the weird-ass story more than anything else, so getting more of that stuff in the final draft was the right call. At number 2 is Undertale. If you're playing Undertale blind, the standard ending feels kind of underwhelming, right? It just sort of stops. It feels incomplete. Your choices feel like they didn't really matter, but that's only because the game is hiding a secret. There's a true ending that you can only be seen if you go back and play the game over again. This is the true pacifist route, greatly expanding the scope of the game and the ending in particular. It adds a new final dungeon, an epic new final boss fight, and a real, actually satisfying conclusion to the story. It's pretty much essential to see at least once if you're enjoying the game at all, because this thing's pretty short, so getting an extra hour or two is a pretty significant addition. Here's the thing. For your first run through, the best you can do is get the neutral ending. If you played through the first time and spared everyone, you didn't kill a single enemy except for the rare one that doesn't give you EXP for beating them, then you're on the right track. Otherwise, you have to play through the game again and spare everyone. It's the only way to get this ending. Then you have to befriend all the boss characters, which eventually open the way to the true lab, the actual final area of the game. Even if you did screw up and kill some things the first go around, it's worth playing through the game again to get the true pacifist stuff, because it really does fill out the game and make it feel like a more complete experience. Once you do that, now it's time to play through the game and kill everything, because that's a whole different experience too. This is one of those games that's rewarding on multiple playthroughs. It is short, and the story can change drastically depending on your choices. And finally, at number 1, it's Resident Evil 2. In Resident Evil 1, playing as either Chris or Jill changed a few things, but there wasn't any real reason to play through the game as both of them. They had their differences, but for the general story, most of the puzzles and mansion, they're basically the same. Resident Evil 2 did something different. It introduced this thing called the zapping system, which has a very lame name, but it made it so that things you do in the first run affect the game in the second. It was a big feature of the original version, and while the remake didn't bring all this stuff back, it does at least do the same thing the original did, where the second playthrough of the game, regardless of the character, is very different compared to the first. So if you play as Leon the first run and Claire in the second, things change a lot. Your starting position is different, the tyrant shows up earlier in the second playthrough, item placement and enemies are shuffled around, certain bosses are different. Like in scenario A, you fight William Birkin as the last boss, but in scenario B, the tyrant is the final fight. Like in the original game, the ending is also expanded in B, with Birkin's final form on the train and the actual epilogue to the story. In the first Resident Evil game, if you only played through one character's story, it really didn't matter if you played the other. They were essentially the same other than some small differences. But with Resident Evil 2, you gotta play as both. Sure, the general flow is basically the same, but changing story elements and special events that only happen in the second go-around make playing through Scenario B pretty much essential. It's not exactly a new game plus when you get down to it, so you're really just playing the game a second time, but there's a lot to get from it. I do, of course, have a bonus for you as well. Nier and Nier Automata. I gotta mention them. Playing them over and over again is kind of their thing. Nier Automata is especially interesting because it's a game where you have to play through 3 times to even get the full story, but playthrough 3 is not the rest of the game, it's just completely different. Like, even the second playthrough does have a lot of change. You're mostly doing the same stuff over again, but you're playing as a new character with hacking powers that dramatically alter certain events. There's expanded scenes that reveal the tragic stories behind the enemies you fight, which adds a dramatic layer to everything, but it's basically the same game. With playthrough 3, though, it's uncharted waters. There's a dramatic new opening, a new protagonist, new locations, new bosses, all new story stuff, and it's hidden away behind the second playthrough. The original Nier was less ambitious, and that makes it a harder game to go back and play for a second or third or maybe even fourth time. But the added context given to the shadows does add an emotional punch to everything going on, and the final secret ending, where you have to go back and play through the game again even though you erased your save to get the previous ending, it's audaciously weird. All the repetition is asking a lot from the player, and I'll be honest, it's kind of a drag sometimes, but it is also worth it. These games really just wouldn't be the same if all you saw was the first playthrough. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.